Members of the Board of Trustees Committee on Audit, please respond present when you hear your name. Trustee Kevin Kim,
Present.
Trustee Robert Mojica,
Present.
great. Trustee Jill O'Donnell Tormey,
Present.
Trustee Angelo Vivo,
Present.
Professor Ned Benton, the faculty rep,
Present.
Professor Verzani, is he here yet? No. Jasmine Ramirez, student rep, or Timothy Hunter, the student alternate? Not yet. Okay, well, we have a quorum. The public meeting on audit is now called to order pursuant to the New York State Legislature's recent extension of the suspension of required in-person meetings under the Open Meetings Law. This meeting is being held remotely via video conference with access to the public session available on the CUNY Board of Trustees website. A copy of the calendar and agenda of items is also available online at the CUNY Board of Trustees website. Additional items may be added during the meeting. And as a reminder, please mute so that we can ensure everyone can hear. I will now take a roll call attendance for members of the Chancellery and other invited guests. Members of the Chancellery and other invited guests, please respond present when you hear your name. Chancellor Matos Rodriguez.
Present.
General Counsel and Senior Vice Chancellor for Legal Affairs, Derek Davis.
Present.
Executive Vice Chancellor and Chief Operating Officer, Hector Batista.
Presente.
Interim Vice Chancellor and Chief Financial Officer, Christina Chiappa.
Present.
Associate Vice Chancellor for Audit, Gordon Taylor.
Present.
Sarah Montero, University Executive Controller.
Present.
Shani Matthews, University Executive Director.
Present.
President Michelle Anderson, the COPS Liaison.
Present.
And from Grant Thornton, we have Dennis Marone,
Present.
Clara Eston,
Present.
and David Bronfman.
Present.
Terrific. It's all you, Kevin.
Thanks, Gail. Let's now turn to the items requiring a vote today. Given that board members are participating remotely and we cannot see everyone on the screen at the same time, I will read the resolutions and ask for members to respond only if you would like to abstain or oppose an item. Otherwise, your vote will be recorded as a yes vote. If you're voting no or abstaining, please state your name and vote accordingly. Additionally, if you wish to second an item or have any questions, please state your name first for the record, and let's try, please, to avoid speaking over one another. Action item 1A is the approval of the minutes of the March 1st, 2022 meeting. I move the item. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you. Is there a discussion on the item? Any questions? We will now vote. Please only respond if you would like to abstain or oppose. Hearing none, it's passed unanimously. I would now like to address section 1B, the policy calendar. Policy item 1B1, a resolution to approve the fiscal year 23 internal audit plan. This resolution will request the audit committee to approve internal audits, planned audit focus areas for fiscal year 23. Associate Vice Chancellor for Audit Gordon Taylor is available to answer any questions. I move the item. May I have a second?
Second, Jill O'Donnell Tormey.
Thank you. Is there a discussion on the item? Seeing none, we will now vote. Please only respond if you would like to abstain or oppose. Okay, seeing none, the item is passed unanimously. Policy item 2B is a resolution to approve the fiscal year 2022 external audit plan. This resolution requests the audit committee to approve CUNY's external audit firm's annual audit plan, which includes the scope, approach, and timing of their financial statement and federal audits. I will now turn it over to Interim Chief Financial Officer Christina Chiappa, who will provide a brief introduction on the topic prior to a presentation by Grant Thornton LLP.
Thank you, Trustee Kim. So I just want to say briefly, this is an annual activity we perform about this time every year. And really what it is our partners at Grant Thornton will go through the process, but our goal is to, we've had a lot of conversations, develop a plan about their approach and timing of both the financial statement and the uniform guidance audit, which focus on federal funds. So I just want to also just recognize the University Executive Controller, Sarah Montero, who's here, and her team and thank them for all the work they'll be doing to make sure we hit all our deadlines. So thank you, Sarah. Claire, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I will share my screen. And please confirm if you can share, or you can see the material. Okay, great. So thank you again for having us. This is the start of or we've actually already started the FY22 audit. So we're excited. I'm sure everybody else is excited as well to get started. I have with me Dennis Marone, who is our industry managing partner for our higher education and not-for-profit practice. He is going to share some industry trends that he's seeing as he meets with boards and audit committees around the country with the clients that we serve. And David Bronfman is a manager in our audit practice, and he and I are going to go through the timing, scope, and plan procedures. Please, we don't plan on hitting every slide here. So if there's something that we didn't touch on in our comments, please feel free to interrupt and excuse me, and ask questions. I would say at a high level, before we go into the details, we've had some, leading up to this meeting, we have multiple meetings with the management team, including Sarah, Christina, and the rest of the group over at CUNY, to talk about what's going on within the university, the system, and how it would impact our audit approach for this fiscal year. There's always things that are new and different that will impact our audit approach. So we've had several discussions at this point, and we're well on our way with the planning process. And then we'll get into some of the details of the timeline in a moment. But this is an opportunity for us to share our plan and to get feedback from the audit committee if you feel there are certain elements that you're aware of from your interactions in your role as members of the audit committee that are creating additional risk that you want us to focus on as well. With that said, David, if you want to just quickly touch on the timetable.
Sure. Thanks, Claire. So regarding the overall timeline, the main thing I wanted to bring up is that we've already spent time with management talking about the plan. The overall goal is to push more work into the summer months to make things less concentrated around like the final field work time, September and October 2022. There are a bunch of procedures that we're going to move more towards the interim field work, which is taking place in the summer months. Particularly, one of the main items is that we're going to perform more test work around CUNY's expenditures in general, in particular, completing test work for the first 3 quarters of HERF during fiscal 2022. And our overall plan is that we will be done with our audit procedures by late October, when we will present our audit results to the committee. So I just want to check to see if anyone has any questions on the timeline and our planned approach.
Hearing none, I think we can move through the significant risks and areas of focus. Again, a lot of this is very similar to what we've done in the past, so I wasn't going to go through these line by line. The risk assessment is done based on materiality, as well as qualitative factors, looking at areas of judgment and the like. So these are all the areas that we'll focus on. I will draw your attention to the last row on this page, which relates to the adoption of a new accounting standard this year. And that new accounting standard relates to leases, both as a lessor and as a lessee. CUNY will have to, in the past, certain leases were capitalized on the balance sheet over the duration of the lease, and other leases were not reported on the balance sheet. They were just reported as expenses or revenues each year annually. And there was some disclosure related to those leases. Now, under this new GASB 87 rule, you will have to report basically all of your leases on your balance sheet. Again, either lessor or lessee, both of those. So management is working through the process to determine what the quote unquote day one journal entry is going to be to record all of those leases on the balance sheet, and then the day two and beyond journal entries on an ongoing basis into the future. So we're helping them through that process, and that will be an area of focus, excuse me, during our audit procedure. That what we primarily focus on is, sorry, what we primarily focus on is making sure that, first of all, the inventory of leases is a complete inventory, said differently, that every single lease that should be identified and capitalized is identified. You've got a very decentralized organization, and making sure that you've got all of the leases captured is an important aspect. And then also the fact that we want to make sure the leases that you're recognizing on your balance sheet are accurately calculated using the right payment stream, the right terms, duration, etc. So that's going to be what we're going to focus on with the GASB 87 adoption. And actually, this next slide just captures a summary of what we would say would be the key activities within the adoption process. And
May I just interrupt you for a second to just make this words larger, please? Can you
oh,
just-
of course, yes. Is that better? I can do it larger.
That's
even.
fine. That's good. Thank you.
Okay. So this is just a list of kind of the key activities within a typical adoption of GASB 87, and capturing kind of the progress over here on the right of where CUNY is in that process. So I know I was just speaking with Sarah this morning even about progress, and I know that there's some key deadlines coming up in the next couple of weeks related to this. So I think there's going to be significant progress, excuse me, over the next few weeks and months relating to this adoption. And then this is just a summary of the disclosures that will need to be added. So we'll work with management to provide a template of what the new disclosures will look like to help them just fill in what it's going to be for CUNY specifically. So more footnotes. And then just going through the rest of these significant areas of focus, again, very similar to what's in the past. Nothing new to report on these. We do, as part of our audit process, involve our IT audit specialist to review CUNY first and some of the key controls around technology as it relates to financial reporting. So that will be part of the audit process, as it has been in the past, very, very similar. So now I'm going to transition from the financial statement audit to the single audit, the uniform guidance audit. As you can see, this is the second year that we'll be doing, we'll be testing HERF as a major program, and we will not be testing student financial aid. I know this is a bit different from what CUNY is used to, but frankly, the federal government is requiring us to audit and requiring all audit firms to audit all universities that are getting HERF money. This isn't just specific to CUNY, this is across the board. So our plan is to do a lot of that work, as David had alluded to, a lot of that work this summer. And that way we'll have a good sense of whether, I know last year there were a few findings, and we've been working with management to make sure that there will be a good process this year to avoid having findings this year in the program. And I think we're in good shape to get a lot of that work done this summer. So here's some of the areas of focus, again, very similar for the major program. And then in terms of the appendix, the only thing I wanted to mention is that under professional standards, the AICPA has changed the rules around the language that goes into our report. So again, this isn't something that's just unique to Grant Thornton or to CUNY. it's across the board. All audit firms are having to revise the wording. Essentially, what it's doing is moving the actual opinion where it says, in our opinion, et cetera, that's now in the front, as opposed to it used to be actually on page 2 or 3 after all sorts of introduction. But now we're saying we're moving, it's a geography change, essentially, moving the opinion earlier in the report, and then elaborating a little bit. If you go to the next page, elaborating a little bit on what our responsibilities are as auditors. I think there's been some misconception around what responsibilities we have and what's not our responsibility. So there's some detail around that in the opinion. And I do see a hand up.
Thank you. It's Ned Benton. I read that section, and I noted, this committee is responsible for reviewing our internal controls. And I read the section where you state that you're going to be obtaining an understanding of our internal controls, and but not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of them. And it's more a question for the committee eventually. But if you're not looking at our internal controls, how does our committee go about discharging its obligations in that section of our charter? I don't expect necessarily an answer from you, but I wanted to raise the question in general.
I mean, I can comment on that, but I can also work with management to provide a more robust response, as a follow-up after this meeting, if you'd like. I mean, I think an important part of an internal control structure is having an internal audit function, which you do have, and internal audit reports to you. And that's a key element in terms of you fulfilling your responsibility as a member of the audit committee to ensure that there's good controls in place. And that would be one aspect of it. I think having the external audit is another piece, but also just the other updates that management provides to the audit committee in terms of issues, concerns, et cetera, around controls would be another piece of it. But I do think there's more to it than that. And what I'd like to do is just connect with management after this, and then we can provide a more robust response to you if that's acceptable.
Sure, and I would say I'm not necessarily expecting an answer from you about this, but at some point it would be good for the committee to have an answer to itself. And not necessarily, I'm not sure what the timing of that would be.
Thank you for the question. And I guess that wraps up the comments that we wanted to make in terms of the audit plan, scope, timing, risk assessment, and key updates that we wanted to provide. So if there are no other questions, maybe I could just ask Dennis to spend a few minutes on trends in the industry.
Well, one quick question. Again, it's Ned Benton.
Yes.
You mentioned that last year we had some findings. And in terms of your process this year, are you going to be looking into those areas in a way that's any different than you did last year in order to sort of check up on and review the corrective actions that were taken?
Yes, we will. That will be included as part of our audit process, is looking to see how management remediated the findings that were reported last year, and that it will actually be included in this year's report to say how those matters were remediated.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Claire, and good afternoon to all the members of the management team as well as to the committee. I just wanted to spend a moment or two just providing some perspective. And as you know, in my role, I meet with a lot of boards of colleges and universities across the nation, both public and private. And we try to accumulate what we see are the key themes and topics that are certainly trending across this space. And so I know we've provided some slides in the past that give you a lot of that detail, but I thought I would just briefly summarize more of this, some of the more salient learnings here. I think you've probably heard that Standard & Poor's and Moody's, the rating agencies that closely watch higher education, they have upgraded their outlook to stable, having been negative for many years. So I guess there's some positive trends or signals there that they're seeing. But I think the big story that institutions, and particularly your institutions, focus on is enrollments. And enrollment numbers still have not rebounded from the pre-COVID periods. In fact, more than 1 million students in the nation have either stopped or paused or are not back in college. And so that could be a function of perhaps taking care of sick family members or taking advantage of a very hot labor market. And so really questioning the value of their education in some degrees. That said, certainly public universities have fared much better during the period of COVID. And I'll talk about perhaps why that is in a moment here. We're seeing international studies programs are beginning to regain some traction after obviously stopping those programs for a protracted period of time. We're similarly seeing institutions receive many more applications from prospective students. And I think that's causing some challenges. Institutions are struggling to determine what the yield will be on those increased levels of applications. Their historical norms in terms of the yield rate hasn't really worked very well. In terms of federal dollars being surged to higher education, there was a total of about $152 billion of federal monies that were surged to colleges and universities, with the preponderance of that amount heading to public institutions. And the reason why I think that's of particular import here is because as we start to see a reduction in the extent of those federal monies, institutions are really going to be feeling perhaps the strain of not seeing those enrollment numbers rebound. As Claire mentioned, we're still focused on auditing the last of the federal monies under the HERF programs that have come to pass. Now, we have heard that the Pell Awards are going to increase by about $400 to about $6,895. Overall, that's not very significant. I doubt that $400 increase in Pell monies will materially change a prospective student's mind as to whether or not to attend. I think what's of greater interest is that President Biden's fiscal 23 proposed budget indicates a proposal to increase the max Pell Award to about $8,670 for academic 23 and 24. So it begins to become a little bit more substantive as institutions can depend on that stream of money. In terms of some of the other big trends that we're seeing across the higher education sector, I would broadly categorize these into a handful of areas. And the first is a focus on refining strategy. I think as many institutions are emerging from the period of COVID, they're being introspective and thinking about where do they sit, how strong is their brand vis-a-vis their other peer institutions that they may be competing with for students. And as a result, after many years, or what feels like many years of austerity measures, we're seeing institutions, both public and private, look for ways to add back budget. And they're adding back budget in those areas that they feel are going to be most impactful in burnishing their brand, in differentiating themselves amongst other institutions. Since I'm speaking to the audit committee today, there continues to be a lot of time and attention devoted to enterprise risk management, not only cybersecurity, but focus on compliance and legal issues. And I know even for institutions where that exercise is handled centralized across a university system, there are issues and risks that are germane and specific to certain institutions, and that they need to make sure that they're mapping those risks to people and process and technology and understanding those concerns. And to that point, we're seeing audit committees be much more engaged in the operations of institutions in terms of working with management, digesting and reacting to the decision points that are being brought to their attention. We all know about the Great Resignation. We know how difficult it is to attract and retain talent. And in that regard, institutions are thinking a lot about what is most important to their employees during this period, not only for those that are already here working with us, but to prospective employees as well. What are going to be the most impactful benefits that resonate with those individuals? Certainly, we're seeing higher education, both public and private, espouse to the tenets of ESG as appropriate, looking at composition of board members, thinking about their carbon footprint, when they go to the debt markets, being mindful of the options that exist. and the evolving role of technology, not only to improve efficiencies, but to use data and gather data from our constituents in a much more, with a much more focus on decision-making and informing strategic planning. And the last three items that I'll cover here very briefly is philanthropy. And perhaps counterfactual to what many people would have thought, philanthropy, even in higher education, was incredibly strong during the period of COVID. And I think that's really a confluence likely of two items. One, for individuals that had property and retirement funds, they saw that value increase significantly. And then they also reacted to what I believe are punctuated and amplified needs of institutions of higher education, saying we really need our alumni base, our stakeholders, our constituents to help us during this profound period of need to sustain the institution. But now, when we see inflation taking hold, my crystal ball is telling me that we might actually see a reduction in the extent of philanthropy as household balance sheets begin to feel the strain of inflation and the price of gas and other staples. And then lastly, capital investments. Institutions are continuing in connection with looking at strategy. They're evaluating their capital footprint. Does all this space make sense? Do we need more space? Do we need to be more strategic in terms of how we use our capital footprint? And then the final item, and probably not entirely relevant to many of the institutions within your system, but a focus on debt. I understand, how that's handled in your institution, but organizations levered up during the period of COVID. In fact, when we look at higher education overall, we saw that they increased their debt load by about 15%. Now, most institutions took on that debt to address priority deferred maintenance while students weren't on campus. Others took on some additional debt in light of the low interest rate climate. As we know, that window's shrinking and closing pretty quickly, so institutions are moving quick that still can to make sure that they're driving down the cost of their capital. So all of that could have been a very lengthy presentation. That was just intended to be a primer and summary of what we're seeing across the sector. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? No? All right. Is that it for Grant Thornton? Thank you. Thank you, team. So now I'll move the item. May I have a second, please? Thank you. Is there any more discussion on this item? Anybody? Okay, seeing none, we will now vote. Please only respond if you would like to abstain or oppose. Okay, seeing none and hearing none, it's unanimously passed. With no more items on the agenda, I move to adjourn this meeting. I have a second, please.
Second, Jill.
Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you, everyone.